Sergeant, and another stack of photographs. This is State's Exhibit 5J through State's Exhibit 5DD. Would you look through those photographs and tell me if you recognize, first of all, do you recognize the photographs?
I do.
And what are those photographs of?
These are photographs that I took of property that was retrieved from the Franklin County Coroner's Office out of this incident.
What do you know where it was retrieved from, or are you just assuming it came from the coroner's office?
Well, one of my folks, Detective Nicole Prysock, picked this property up from the Franklin County Coroner's Office, I believe on December 7th, 2020. And I retrieved a box containing these items on December 17th after I was notified by Detective Art Hughes, the lead detective, to photograph these items. So I went down to the property room, retrieved this box, opened the box, took photographs of these items, and put them back in the box, put them back in the property room after I was finished.
So you retrieved them from the property.
Correct.
Are you sure that they came from the morgue, or could they have come from Riverside Hospital?
That, I'm not sure, to be honest. It's so much property. But I know I picked this up after Art Hughes told me to pick up he gave me numbers identifying what to collect from the property room.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't even show those to you. Oh, let me have those photographs. May I publish these, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. This is State's Exhibit 5J. And tell me what that is a photograph of.
Detective Hughes had asked me to take photos of any holes or tears in the fabric of the clothing that was in this property. So this is a photo of a hoodie that I retrieved from this property that then I mark. You'll see certain yellow arrows where I've marked tears or holes in the clothing.
Such as right there.
That's correct.
And when we talk about posed, this is a posed photo, is that correct?
That's correct. That's butcher paper that we use. It's clean. And then I got an identifier which identifies, it's our case number, which identifies the date and time that I was performing these actions.
And this yellow arrow identifies a tear, but the garment is cut, is that correct?
That's correct. I pieced those together so it would be understood that it's a hoodie. If you would lay them out flat, you wouldn't know what it was. So I put those together to show that at one point this was a complete hoodie without the tears.
Okay. And you've done a number of homicide cases, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is it uncommon for clothing to have been cut off the decedent?
It happens frequently, but that's how the squad is able to, or the hospital is able to try and treat folks.
State's Exhibit 5K
You'll see various,
that?
yeah, I believe that's, it may be a close-up of the one we just saw, but as we go through these, you'll see a succession of arrows pointing out
Yeah.
various holes or tears or,
So that's a close-up of a hole in the hoodie.
correct.
State's Exhibit 5L.
Same thing, same answer, just pointing out with scale, a hole
Okay.
or tear.
State's Exhibit 5M.
This is the back of the hoodie, just flipped over, the same type of activity going on there. And I did place clean white printer paper in between to show a contrast, so one could actually see the
See the
holes and tears, correct.
Okay. Then State's Exhibit 5N.
I believe we're seeing the close-ups of what we just saw an overall of on the previous photo.
State's Exhibit 5O.
And pair of boxers with arrows pointing out similar discrepancies in the normal fabric.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5P.
We have this labeled as just a T-shirt, and the same type of activity where I put paper in between the fabric. It was also torn in different spots or cut, and I was able to piece this back together to give some kind of a look of the T-shirt.
And that's the front of the T-shirt.
That is the front of the T-shirt, yes, sir.
State's Exhibit 5R.
And I believe this would be the back of the same T-shirt, same type of activity with the arrows and holes and tears.
State's Exhibit. I'm sorry, that was 5Q. Can't read my own writing. State's Exhibit 5R.
Close-ups of that one grouping from the overall.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5S.
It's another close-up with scale.
State's Exhibit 5T.
I believe that's the lower right of the rear of the T-shirt with scale, just a close-up.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5U.
And I believe these were shorts and just posed again.
Okay. That's the front of the shorts.
Correct, I believe so.
State's Exhibit 5V.
And I believe these would be the back of the shorts with arrows pointing out anomalies or holes or tears.
State's Exhibit 5W.
Close-up with scale.
State's Exhibit 5X.
It's the rear of the shorts there at the top of the waistband with just the arrows and scale.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5Y.
Front of a pair of jeans, and I pieced those together to, obviously they're cut. They were cut on both legs, and pieced those together to show a front view.
State's Exhibit 5Z.
Similar thing, back view.
Okay. And it has the arrows there, is that correct?
That's correct. I believe it just for an overall, trying to get the whole pair of jeans in. There may
Turn
be,
off your phones.
Sorry, Your Honor, it was me. Violation. I apologize to everyone.
You want me to give it to you? State's Exhibit 5AA.
That is a close-up of those arrows you pointed out with scale.
Okay. And then we have State's Exhibit 5BB.
In that part of that package that I retrieved, this was a holster that was in it.
And that's the clip side of the holster.
Correct, sir.
Okay. State's Exhibit 5CC.
Opposite side of the same holster.
Okay. And finally, State's Exhibit DD.
This is an overall view of the rest of the property. I believe that's a wallet as well. Yes, that came from.
And these are the contents of the wallet that you've laid out, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Sergeant. I believe that's all the questions I have at this time.
Any cross-examination?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good morning, Sergeant.
Morning, sir.
We know each other. I'm Mark Collins. I represent one of the attorneys for Jason Meade in this action. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate your work. I just have a couple quick questions for you and concepts. I'm going to use a couple pictures. I have their markings for the prosecution. It's the same picture that were provided to us. That's okay. There's too many. Thank you, though. Sergeant, what type of other responsibilities have you had in your law enforcement career?
A lot, actually. Been on 30 years, and I've been patrol, internal affairs, community liaison. Was promoted in 2012 and back to patrol for a while, and internal affairs and over to crime scene.
And when you're on crime scene and you're called to the scene, there's normally a lead detective, correct?
Correct.
Right. And in any time there's involved in an officer, there's other people there, correct? Part of the CERT team.
Correct.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the CERT team is.
It doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be where there was a select group that would process officer-involved cases, more senior detectives and supervisors.
Mainly from the homicide division.
That's correct, mainly from homicide.
And back in December of 2020, that was in place.
It was.
Okay. And their job was to gather as much information as possible and provide it to the prosecution.
Yes, sir.
But they also would provide it to the Division of Police, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when you got to the scene on December the 4th, 2020, a few hours later, correct?
Correct.
And your team, right?
Correct.
You're being guided by Detective Mounts.
Correct.
And Detective Mounts was part of the CERT team?
Correct.
And he was a scene leader, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Detective Hughes is part of the CERT team, correct?
Correct.
Detective Kroom, who was there that day, correct?
Correct.
Detective Shepard.
Yes, sir.
All those people are experienced homicide detectives on CERT team members, and they were all at the scene that day, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're following their lead, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in general, and I'm going to, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
May.
This had been marked previously by the government as 2HH. Take a look at that. May I have that?
Yes, sir.
May I publish this, Your Honor?
You may.
So using this kind of in generality, Sergeant, those cones on 2HH, that's everywhere. You don't need the lights down. Don't worry. Thank you, though. Those cones are placed by people on your team, correct?
Correct.
And no one on the team knows how those got there, right?
Correct.
that you can only photograph them as you observed them.
That's right.
And so when the government put the picture of the door up there, that's just a picture of the door as they observed it 2 or 3 or 4 hours later.
That's right.
Can't say if the door was open at the time, can't say how far the door was open at the time of the incident, can only take a picture of how it was when you took that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now specifically on 2HH, these are all shell casings to right below the fence, correct?
Correct.
All right, and there was 6 of them, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So on there, tell the ladies and the jury how shell casings normally are ejected from a firearm.
For right-handed individuals, they would usually eject out of the chamber to the right, up and to the right.
And that's a handgun, correct?
Correct.
And how about a rifle, sir?
I'm not an expert on rifles, but it pretty much acts the same type of concept, but I'm not sure about distance and height that they would reach. It all depends. There's variables involved, the height of the firearm when it was fired, whether someone was standing or kneeling, that type of thing.
All can affect it, right?
Yes, sir.
And anything prior to you guys getting there could have affected where these ended up, correct?
That's where they were when we took photos, but that's a fair statement.
Prior to that, one of the objects of the first responders is to try to secure the scene and isolate it so there's no scene contamination, correct?
Yes, sir.
But things happen and things are moved during that process, right?
It could be.
Wind can cause it, people stepping on it, kicking it by accident, many things can happen. That's why you want as few people in the scene as possible, correct?
That's the goal.
Now, you brought out the rifle before with the prosecutor. On a rifle, did that have a deflector on it?
Oh, man. I don't know, sitting here.
If I told you it did, you would have no reason to disagree with me, correct?
I would have no reason sitting here
And
disagreeing.
what does a deflector do on a rifle, sir?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. That rifle you indicated could be fully automatic, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when something's fully automatic, let me back up. When you have a handgun and you pull the trigger, how many projectiles comes out?
1.
If it's semi-automatic, how many come out?
1.
If you have a rifle that's fully automatic and you pull the trigger once, how many projectiles come out?
As long as you hold the trigger in, as many projectiles is going to come out.
If the quickest you can or something like that, right? It varies.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And part of your job, the crime scene search unit, is when you found that you were given the gun or the rifle,
Correct.
you compared to how many were left in the magazine, correct?
Correct.
And you compared it that there was 6 shell casings, correct?
Yes.
So your job is to say, hey, are we missing any more shell casings? So you know the capacity of that magazine is 30, correct?
Yes.
So there was a discrepancy of 1, correct?
Yes.
However, that you asked my client, hey, how many did you start with, correct?
I don't remember the exact conversation, but it would have taken place, yes.
Right. And he told you 29, correct?
There was I can't remember exactly what he told me, to be honest. I just can't remember, but
You just told the prosecutor that discrepancy was cleared up by my client.
he indicated there was 29. I just can't remember exactly what he said.
And how many were left in the magazine? 23, correct?
Correct.
So he didn't say 30, he didn't say 28, 26, 25, he didn't say 23 in there, correct?
Correct.
He could have no possible way of knowing how many came out when he pulled, correct? That's impossible.
I don't know that, to be honest. If it was set on fully automatic, yes, sir, that's correct. He
He would
wouldn't.
have no way of knowing. So the 23 that were left in the chamber, plus the 6 projectiles in the government's 2HH, meet 29, correct?
Correct.
And that's exactly what my client told the detectives that evening, correct?
That's correct.
So he told the truth. And that's corroborated, and that's overruled. So he was truthful about how many he started with.
Correct. The numbers matched.
If he wanted to lie, he could have said, yeah, there's 24, then nothing would make sense, right?
That is correct.
Now, yeah. May I approach a witness room?
Okay,
These were previously marked as Government's Exhibit 2XXY. And I'm 2XXY. And this is the defendant's Exhibit I, if you can take a look at that. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. May I publish that?
You may.
Sergeant, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what plaintiff's or prosecution's 2XXY is.
That is a scene sketch.
Okay. And Mr. Merkel placed that up there, correct?
He did.
All right. And on there, there's an evidence legend, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you list 14 things as well as 2 cars.
They're on there. I didn't particularly list. Gary Cooper did that, and Sonny Williams did the evidence, but that's what it shows.
And that is drawn based on the evidence collection, correct? Defendant's I.
Correct.
So those 14 numbers there, when the jurors have it back in there, those 14 numbers match the 14 numbers plus the 2 cars on this.
Yes, sir.
And that's how you keep track of where things were collected and where they were found.
That's correct.
And there'll be a key of all that, correct, for the evidence that was turned in.
Correct.
And when you guys turn in evidence, you don't, or photograph evidence, you have no idea if it's relevant or not, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You take as many pictures of the whole scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
So in this situation, there were pictures taken of each bedroom, right?
I believe so.
The downstairs bedroom, correct?
I believe so.
Outside around the house, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the prosecutor's photographs they showed you so far, there's a lot more than that of the totality of the situation, correct?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned on direct with the prosecutor that the gun that was found in the kitchen, the extended mag clip,
Yes, sir.
and you recognize that as an extended magazine clip?
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that is?
It's pretty much self-explanatory, but it extends out from the weapon. It doesn't tighten flush with the weapon. It holds more ammunition in it.
And with regards to that, you indicated that there were DNA swabs done of the trigger, correct?
I believe so.
The grip
Correct.
and the frame, correct?
I believe so.
And on those pictures, you can see blood on the gun, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then with regards, the prosecutor just showed you pictures of the holster, okay? May I publish, Your Honor?
What?
The prosecutor showed you pictures of the holster, correct?
Yes.
May I publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
So first on 2BB, that's one view of the holster, correct?
Yes.
And there's no blood on there or anything, correct?
Not that I know of.
If there was, you would have noted it, correct?
I didn't test for blood, but visually, I didn't see any.
Correct, but visually, when you guys go through the clothing, if there's a hole, you mark it, right?
That's correct.
And so visually, if you saw blood on here, you would have denoted that in the notes, correct?
Hopefully I would have, but I was just, I was assigned to take pictures of the clothing and what was in the property. So I wasn't doing a visual. I mean, there was blood on most everything that I took out, but I don't remember blood on particularly on the holster.
You don't see anything there, correct?
I don't.
And on 2CL, nothing on there, correct?
Correct.
And do you know if that was tested for blood or DNA?
I don't know that.
Now, you had different divisions with regards to your team, right, of duties?
That is correct.
You had your specifics. Say the name of that machine.
Leica, the scanner. Yes, sir.
And 3D, and how high was that fence? Do you remember?
It's about around exactly 6 feet. I mean, give or take a few inches.
And then in front, where the pictures are, there's a step up to the porch, correct?
Correct.
And then there's another step up into that side door, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in terms of your responsibilities, someone else, Detective Gibson's probably taking all the pictures, right?
That's true. Yes.
And the other detectives are dividing up, collecting the evidence.
Yes.
And then as a team, you give that all to either Detective Mounts and then Detective Hughes, correct?
The property we would turn into the property room.
But you're guided at the scene by Detective Mounts.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at that scene, Detective Mounts was there involved in helping point things out and stuff, correct?
Yes.
And no one on your team had anything to do with the car that was parked on the street, correct?
Correct.
So there were pictures taken, but you guys had nothing to do with that, correct?
That wasn't our responsibility, no,
That
sir.
was the responsibility of Detective Mounts, correct?
I believe at that scene, that would be his
That
responsibility.
was his responsibility. So if he were to testify that, he was the person who dealt with the car.
I believe so.
And when I mean deal with the car, I mean the car eventually is taken to the barn, correct?
That's correct.
That's normal procedure.
That's normal
And
procedure.
then it's photographed at the barn, correct?
Yes,
Tow truck has to come and get the car, right?
yes,
So that's all Detective Mounts.
yes,
Okay. And you never saw Detective Talaferro there, correct?
no,
At the scene. She was not involved at the scene on December the 4th.
no, she was not working that day.
She had nothing to do with gathering evidence or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Okay.
Sergeant, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here, sir.
Any redirect?
Just briefly, Your Honor. Sergeant, Mr. Collins just asked you about preserving the scene and keeping it from being contaminated. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And primarily, what that means is they keep outsiders out. Police officers are often inside of the perimeter and inside of the scene. Is that correct?
The way I would describe, most of the time, we try to keep most everybody out, police officers including, once we get there. Before then, there's obviously
Right.
a lot of other concerns, but after we get there, we want to limit as much as possible.
Once you guys begin your documentation of the scene and processing of it, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you can't account for who may have gone through the scene, gone through the side yard prior to your arrival,
I cannot.
including the defendant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So when Mr. May I
You may.
publish this? This is State's Exhibit 2HH. All these shell casings and so forth. You can't state that the defendant wouldn't have had the opportunity to observe those shell casings prior to your arrival at the scene.
Your Honor. As to what my client.
Hold on. Because I have real time. Overruled.
Could you, I've got lost in the,
I may have lost the question at this point.
I can read it. All these shell casings and so forth, you can't state that the defendant wouldn't have had the opportunity to observe those shell casings prior to your arrival.
that's correct. I would not.
So when Mr. Collins says that in reconciling the count, the ammunition count, that Mr. Meade would have had no knowledge of how many shots were fired, you can't say that. Is that correct?
If I'm understanding your question right, if the weapon was set to automatic at the time of this incident, I would not know how many rounds came out at the time of one trigger pull.
Correct, but if Mr. Meade had observed the shell casings, he'd know that there were 6 shell casings there.
I don't know what Mr. Meade observed.
I understand that. That's my point, is
Your Honor, I'll object on leading at this point.
Councilman, approach real quick. You may continue. Oh, sorry. You guys are becoming pros.
I guess to reiterate, Sergeant, you don't know what Mr. Meade may have seen or not seen before you got to the scene, is that correct?
That's correct.
You also did some DNA swabbing or some swabbing to collect possible DNA. Well, you personally didn't, but your team did.
That's correct.
Just because swabs are taken doesn't mean that you necessarily find DNA or that there's sufficient DNA for comparison, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Very briefly.
Okay.
Sergeant, when you're taking pictures of shell casings, someone else has already searched out to look for those, correct?
Most of the time, yes.
And they could be hidden in the grass, correct?
Correct.
They could be hidden from the naked eye, correct?
Correct.
And people actually get down sometimes to look and see. There's, shell casings are very small, correct?
Very small, yes, sir.
It's fair to say that in all your years of crime scene search and all the other divisions that you've had, people miss sometimes the amount of shell casings that are seen, correct?
Unfortunately, yes.
Thank you, sir.
All right, you sit down. Are those your gloves that you brought, or?
They were over here. Okay, from yesterday.
Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state will call Ms. Puglia next.
You come on up here. It's a little maze throughout this courtroom. I should put yellow tape down, so give everyone a. Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear, affirm under penalty of perjury, your testimony in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Hold yourself up close to the microphone. And you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just get all my exhibits here. All right, Ms. Keelia, I want to start by having you say and spell your name for us.
My name is Amy Culia. First name is Aimee. Last name is Qulia.
Where do you work?
I work at the FBI in the Firearms and Toolmarks Unit.
What's your position there?
I am a physical scientist forensic examiner in the Firearms and Toolmarks Unit.
Would you please tell us about the educational background that you have that allows you to be in that position?
I have an undergraduate degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I have a master's degree in forensic science from the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida.
When did you obtain your degrees?
The undergraduate was in 2002, and I think 2013 was my graduate degree.
How long have you worked at the FBI laboratory?
Approximately 19 years,
And how long have you been in the Firearms and Toolmarks Unit?
about 9 of those years.
What did you do at the FBI laboratory before moving over to Firearms and Toolmarks?
I worked in the latent print unit, that's fingerprints and palm prints, in the FBI laboratory as well.
And why did you move units at the lab?
I was just looking for diversity of work, more excitement, and possible deployments.
You actually have an interest in firearms?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I grew up with firearms. My father was, a firearms instructor for the FBI, so I've been shooting and handling firearms most of my life.
Did you obtain any specialized training to become a qualified Firearms and Toolmarks examiner?
Yes, I did. I followed the training program set out by the FBI, and that's a quality document that documents each aspect of my training. From start to finish, it took about 2.5 years to complete this training.
Could you please explain to the jurors in a little more detail about what's involved in this training to become a qualified Firearms and Toolmarks examiner?
Yes. Basically everything having to do with firearms, so how they're designed, how they're made, the history of firearms development and ammunition. Most of my job is at a microscope comparing bullets and cartridge cases to individual firearms to see if a particular firearm fired a particular bullet or cartridge case. Another part of my job is going to crime scenes, conducting shooting incident reconstructions. I did this work as a mentee. I had a mentor, and it's like an apprentice program. I did a series of comparison. I'm also qualified in Toolmarks, so I learned about the manufacturing of tools. And basically, it's a kind of a mentee-mentor relationship. So going to different crime scenes, taking case notes for examiners, writing reports, and then the culmination of this is passing a proficiency or qualification exam. So I had to take qualification exams in firearms, Toolmarks, and shooting incident reconstructions to become qualified to do this work on my own.
So if I understand your testimony correctly, this mentor-mentee relationship you're describing where you learn how to become, and in particular, I'm talking about the shooting incident reconstructions, that involves you going and working these cases with your mentor, correct?
Yes, my mentor as well as other qualified examiners.
So what is entailed in a shooting incident reconstruction as you're learning this process and how to do it yourself?
Are you talking about could you be more clear? I'm sorry.
When you're learning how to perform shooting incident reconstructions with your mentor, can you tell us about that process and what you're doing and what the ultimate goal is and being qualified to do those on your own?
Got it. When we deploy to a crime scene, we are looking for bullet holes, impacts, and we are establishing trajectories. We are looking to document everything in place as we find it. We do this using case notes and photographs and 3D scanners and 3D imaging technology. We also, as part of my mentee-mentor relationship, I would practice writing reports and practice testifying as to the results of those reports. Is that what you mean?
And what do those reports yield? What kind of findings are the shooting incident reconstructionists able to obtain using this process that you've described?
We establish unique identifiers for anything that we find on scene. So each hole or impact is given a number. We describe the quality of those findings. So we will say their location, how they look, their directionality. A trajectory connects two or more points within space. So sometimes we can do this using a single hole if it can sustain weight. We'll be able to put a long rod through it and then measure 2 points or more on that rod to establish how it's moving through 3 dimensions. So the X, the Y, and the Z axis on 2 points on a single plane will show you how it's moving through space in relationship to other items.
So, and that's based on the damage, for example, to like a solid object that's been struck by a projectile, and you look at that and are able to get the trajectory from it?
That's correct.
And you had described in your testimony holes and impacts. And could you please explain to the jurors what those are and what the difference is?
A hole is basically any time a projectile penetrates an item. So it goes in and it comes out of an item. An impact is where it will impact the item but not penetrate through it. It might deflect or skip off of it.
Thank you for explaining that. So as part of your training to become a shooting incident reconstructionist, did you have to pass tests? I think you mentioned that earlier, but can you tell us about the final process to become fully qualified to do a shooting incident reconstruction?
Yes. So a large part of my training was, again, going on deployments with qualified examiners and observing how they are documenting the scene and how they are writing their reports. So I did that in a learning capacity for about 2.5 years. Then I passed a proficiency test, or excuse me, a qualification test. The one that was given to me was a car shot from known angles. I had to document it in the way that is expected, write a report, and I passed that qualification exam. After being qualified, I also had observed exercises. So it's a real scene, and a qualified examiner came to my first, I believe, 2 scenes to just make sure that I was doing everything as expected.
And having gone through that process, what results did you obtain through your qualification to become a shooting incident reconstructionist?
I passed all of those exams.
Thank you. How many shooting incident reconstruction deployments have you been involved with in your career?
Many. I would estimate between 20 and 40 total. That's in a learning capacity, and that's as a qualified examiner, whether I'm the lead examiner, meaning that my name will appear on the report, or I am assisting other examiners. So I still go out to crime scenes, even if I'm not the lead examiner and won't be published on the report, to serve as kind of a technician for them.
And have you testified as a firearms expert before on a shooting incident reconstruction case?
Not specifically a shooting incident reconstruction case. Most of my testimony is in the firearms realm.
Thank you. Do you belong to any discipline-specific groups?
I do. I am a member of AFTE. That's the Association of Firearms and Toolmark Examiners. That is our discipline-specific organization.
Thank you. And so when you are called to deploy to a shooting scene, can you just walk us through the process of what that happens since your qualification to do these sort of examinations?
Sure. When I am called to deploy to a scene, I deploy as part of a team generally. And that team is called the LSRT. That stands for the Laboratory Shooting Reconstruction Team. I'm not the only person from the laboratory that deploys. I represent the Firearms and Toolmarks unit, but we also deploy with 3 other units that help me basically run through the scene. There is an ERTU person, that's the Evidence Response Team Unit. That person serves as a go-between between the local entity that is collecting evidence and my team, the LSRT. We also deploy with the Technical Hazards Unit, so they will help me if there's a bullet hole really high up, they'll get ladders so I can inspect it. If I have to cut into a wall, they'll actually do the cutting. They just handle the mechanics of the scene. And then I also deploy with a member of the Operational Projects Unit. I'll refer to them as OPU. They supply photographers and those 3D scanners and total stations to document the scene in 3 dimensions.
And how do you and your team then, with all this personnel, examine a scene? What's that process look like?
Before we deploy, we have a pre-deployment meeting. So we will get some information regarding what we should expect at the scene. So if there's any technical hazards, what the environment is like, if we're going under the compulsion of like a warrant. So we will deploy knowing usually a rough number of how many shots were taken, what type of firearm was used, and all of that helps me prepare my deployment kit so I know which supplies to bring, what to expect generally when I show up.
And when you show up at the scene, do you collect evidence?
No, I am completely separate from the evidence side of the house.
But is there an analysis of holes or impacts at the scene that's conducted by you?
Yes, yes.
And you also analyze the scene to calculate trajectories, correct?
To establish the trajectories and to make sure that they're documented appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Are there any limitations in the examinations that you conduct when you're performing a shooting incident reconstruction?
Yes. If there are missing items, that's generally something I can't say anything about. So if, for example, glass was shot and it has crumpled, I can't say anything about if something went through that glass. If there is missing evidence, so if the crime scene has been disturbed and things are missing from the scene, I can't really put them back or come to any conclusions regarding missing evidence. If a projectile or a bullet hits an intervening object, it can cause deflection, and that means it can fragment and go in 2 different directions. Also, if, say, 3 shots were taken, there might be more or less than 3 holes. So if there aren't any intervening objects, if they all go into a decedent or something that is no longer in the scene, might not have any trajectories to establish. Conversely, it could also hit an item and fragment, and I might have 2 or more holes from a single projectile.
Thank you. So turning our attention to this case, I want to ask you about a shooting incident reconstruction done here back in December of 2020. So let me ask you, on December 17th, 2020, were you deployed to 3996 Estate Place here in Columbus, Franklin County, Ohio?
Yes, I was.
And that was for a shooting incident reconstruction, correct?
That's correct.
And to help you explain to the jurors what happened with your analysis and everything, I'm going to show you some exhibits. So let me get those. May I approach, Your Honor?
Okay.
So Ms. Keelia, I'm going to start by handing you exhibits that have been marked for identification purposes as 10A through 10F. Would you please review those items and let me know when you're finished?
Okay,
So those are 6 photographs, correct?
that's correct.
Do you recognize the scenes depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do.
Are they scenes from 3996 Estates Place back on December 17th, 2020?
Yes.
Do all 6 of those photographs fairly and accurately depict the scene as you saw it on that day at your analysis?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I publish?
Yes.
Thank you, Meade. I'm going to take those and put them up on our screen. Thank you. I'm going to start with Exhibit 10A. That's right. Okay. There we go. All right, I'm going to focus in here on the middle. Lost my autofocus. And actually, while we're talking about this particular exhibit, there's another one I want to show you, which is number 26. All right. Are you familiar with this item, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
That is a storm door.
Is that the same storm door from Exhibit 10A?
Yes, it is.
And prior to court, when you came into town to testify for trial, did you have an opportunity to examine Exhibit 26? Look at it?
Yes, I did.
And is this is the door from 3996 Estates Place from December 2020, correct?
That is correct.
And having a chance to review this item, is it in substantially similar condition as it was when you came and did your shooting incident reconstruction back in 2020?
It is.
Thank you. So going back to Exhibit 10A, door looks a little bit different there. Tell us about the items that are in the screen part of that door.
I established unique identifiers. That means that I've numbered each hole and impact. I means impact, so impact number 1, hole number 2, hole number 3, and you can't really see it, but hole number 4 is down at the bottom. I also have my trajectory rods that I spoke of earlier, and those are inserted into the holes. They're stabilized by trajectory cones to keep them in place, and then they were secured into place with some duct tape on the backside.
And that's all consistent, and that's the process that's followed, correct?
That's correct.
And when you, and those are holes, you had described earlier identifying holes created by projectiles. So you identified those items there as holes 1 through 3?
Impact 1 and holes 2 through 4.
Okay, thank you. And so how were you able to establish those trajectories to line up those rods and establish the direction that the projectiles were going?
I established the directionality and the trajectory by looking at what remained at the scene. So the back of the door has metal that is part of that grate that is curled in a certain way that indicates the directionality of the projectile as it passed through. So it didn't just blow out, it's actually kind of curled back, which if you're used to looking at scenes and how typical materials interact with projectiles, this is something that I've learned to do and interpret.
Thank you. Let's have a look now at Exhibit 10B. Can you tell us what we see here?
Those are close-ups of my tags. So we have the indicators surrounding each hole to establish which hole we're looking at. We have the trajectories that were established, trajectory 1, 2, and 3. Those were marked with little blue tags, not only for my documentation, but also so they're picked up by the scanner.
Thank you. And I will show you briefly 10C, which is this another view of those same trajectory rods and the screen door at the home?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Okay, now moving on to 10D. Could you please tell us what is depicted in State's Exhibit 10D?
That is a photograph of impact 5, hole 6, and hole 7.
Okay. And where is this in the residence?
This is in the kitchen area above the sink, so kind of close to the ceiling, above like a soffit area.
Thank you. And this is State's Exhibit 10E. Please tell us about this. Is this a close-up of hole 7?
Yes, it is. This is the trim above that area, so it's actually oriented sideways. So if you flip it, that's, yeah, correct. There you go. That's it in its correct position.
Thank you. Finally, State's Exhibit 10F. Please verify whether this is oriented correctly.
No, we got to flip it again.
Like this.
There we are, yes.
Thank you.
And that's a hole going through part of a picture and into the wall.
You mentioned a few times during your testimony that a 3D scanner is used in shooting incident reconstructions. And I believe you mentioned that one was used for this particular shooting incident reconstructions. Can you tell us a little bit about that for this case?
Just generally, so that is somewhat outside of my scope. I just make sure that those graphics are in alignment with what I am documenting in my notes and that everything was done appropriately. On a very basic level, it just takes measurements from objects within the scene and relates them to each other to form a 3D product.
And of course, this is a tool that you were trained on to use and that process to become qualified to do shooting incident reconstructions, correct?
Well, to be clear, I don't run the scanner. I just have the very basic knowledge of how it works, so I can make sure that my graphics accurately are representative of the scene.
To interpret the results, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. And did you write a report to reflect your findings on the examination of the Estates Place residence?
Yes, I did.
And based on your analysis of the scene, what conclusions did you reach and document in your report?
I documented 7 bullet holes or impacts. I established 3 trajectories going through a storm door, going from the southwest to the northeast. So that's from like the yard into the kitchen. I also established those 3 of the 7 impacts and holes were in the kitchen. I did not associate those with any of the trajectories that go through the door.
And can you explain to us whether that's significant that the impacts and holes in the kitchen didn't line up with the trajectories that you established in the door? What does that mean?
That means that there's not a direct correlation. So it wasn't a straight shot through the door directly into like the wall above the sink, basically.
And you were describing how bullets can deflect or break apart. And can you explain how those marks could be consistent with the trajectories established at the screen door?
They could be, but that is not necessarily the case. It is not unexpected for an intervening object to be hit and for something to fragment and go off its original course and end up in another area, for example. But I'm very clear in my report that I don't know.
And that's one of the limitations that you've discussed, correct?
That's correct.
Now, has your experience allowed you to tell us about how different materials interact with projectiles?
Yes.
And that's based on the hardness of the material, correct? Maybe the composition.
Its
of it?
composition would be more accurate, yes.
And can you please tell us a little bit about how, say, like a metal material interacts with a bullet versus a softer, more viscous material like the human body?
In general, so when I'm test firing, I usually test fire into a water tank, and that tends to slow bullets down very much. It's a very viscous fluid. It's just water. So I can take like a high-powered rifle and shoot it into water, and it stops the rounds from moving. So it's engaging with them, and it slows it down. If you have something easier to penetrate, and you're not engaging with tissue or any viscous fluid, bullets will tend to zip. So they'll go through a couple intervening objects without changing trajectory very much. That's a very general overview, although that it is consistent. With looking at materials like metal, sometimes we'll look for crowning. A high velocity round will hit something, and it's kind of like that image of a drop of milk going into a pool of milk where it creates kind of a crown. That will happen with a high velocity round going through metal. That's something that we typically see. We look at how it interacts with glass, so I can tell the number of shots and which one was taken first if I have like a laminate glass that is still there based on the fracture pattern. So all of this kind of culminates into my assessment of the scene and how I would expect bullets to engage with the substrates around me at the scene.
Can we
And
take
can you
a,
just
can we
tell
take
us-
a quick break, real quick? You want to approach? Break in the middle of your testimony. We're going to take our morning break now. Do not discuss this case among yourselves. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form an expressive opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. About 15 minutes. going to be calling in a specific juror. So if you can discontinue the recording, we have I have some questions of one of the jurors. Don't do anything. Everyone can have a seat. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if any of you guys need to take a break for any reason whatsoever, stand up, raise your hand, scream, yell, get my attention, whatever you want to do. Ms. Quilla, you're still under oath. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Culia, before the break, I believe we were talking about how bullets passing through different materials can affect whether or not they're zippy, as you describe, or if they change trajectory in some significant fashion. Now, drawing back my memory of where we had left off, I think one of your last answers, you used the word substrate when you're describing how bullets have these different interactions depending on the material, and I just want to make sure, because I mean, I'm not 100% sure what you mean either, so if you could just kind of explain what you mean by substrate and this really technical information that you're sharing with the jurors.
Substrate is any material that is engaging with the projectile. So that could be drywall, it could be corrugated steel if we're in a warehouse, it could be the pavement.
So, so it sounds like based on what you've explained to us so far, it's fair to say that the way that a projectile bullet interacts with like something hard, or certain substrates, it can go through a lot. Like I think, is it your experience you've seen projectiles actually pass through like multiple like walls or even buildings?
Yes, I've seen that.
But you also said that you and your lab will test fire high-powered rifles and you shoot it in the water, and the mere water stops the bullets, right?
That is correct.
How much water are these bullets passing through before they stop?
I don't actually have eyes on the bullets when I'm shooting into the tank, but the dimensions of our water in the tank are about 4 feet by probably 8 feet. So that stops everything that I shoot into it.
And does that include high-power assault rifles?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to direct your attention back to Exhibit 26. I'm going to bring this over to you. That's all right, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I believe I have the back of the door facing you, correct?
Yes, I'm facing the back of it.
Okay, so let's talk about the holes here. And you were telling us about, I believe, crowning was the term you used earlier.
Correct.
And do you see that deformation in the material here in the door?
I see deformation, not crowning. So crowning is about the diameter of the bullet that passes through. And there's a defect at the top of the door. That is not a bullet hole, it's not crowning, although it would kind of look like that. That's from the hydraulic that was attaching the door to the frame. With this, what I was looking at is how the metal curled back from engaging with the projectile.
Okay. And what is the significance of the curling that is here on these marks?
That indicates the directionality. So that's how I was looking at this, arranging my trajectory rods and my trajectory cones to reflect the engagement that the bullet had as it was passing through.
Though it's curling as opposed to crowning, does that still allow you to make a conclusion as to whether the directionality of the trajectory?
Yes, so just by looking at this, I can tell that all of the projectiles passed from the side of the door, the outside to the inside.
Okay. And would their direction have changed much based on this deformation here? Assuming no intervening objects.
It wouldn't have changed very much. We are, I should mention, missing a part of the scene. So there was some type of glass on the external portion of this door. This is on the inside. So it did have to pass through something that I was not able to examine.
Now, was the glass there at the time of your examination on December 17th of 2020?
Fragments of the glass were there
Okay, fragments. And where were those fragments?
on the ground.
Okay. But was there anything here in the frame?
No, nothing within the frame.
To clarify your answer, are you talking about the door as it was originally composed before it was struck by bullets?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. So ultimately, did your analysis of the scene yield a graphic?
Yes, the operational projects unit generated a graphic, and then it reflects everything that is in my report visually in 2 dimensions.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I proceed? I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 10. All right, thank you. Is this a fair and accurate copy? May I publish, Your Honor?
You may, but
And is this a fair and accurate copy of the diagram that you were describing?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Okay. So, and you had, I believe you indicated, and just to be clear for the record, did you indicate that the graphic created in relation to this case fairly and accurately reflects the conclusions that you reached based on your analysis and work at the scene?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And can you explain what these yellow lines are here, going from T1, T2, T3 up?
Those are extensions of the trajectories that I established through the door. So that doesn't represent the entire rod, the trajectory rod. It extends beyond that point, both forward and backward into the kitchen.
Thank you. So this is marked with some abbreviations. So there's I1, H2, H3, and H4. Are those the impact 1, H2, or hole 2, hole 3, hole 4 from the door that you were telling us about earlier?
Yes, they are.
And then over here, there's I5, H6, and H7, correct?
That is correct.
And are those the impact and holes that you were telling us about earlier with the photos from the kitchen of the residence?
That is correct, yes.
There's also a purple H that's been marked on the diagram. What's that?
That is a very large hole that was present when I arrived on scene. It was part of the wall that was missing and I was not able to examine. So I really can't say what happened there.
Now, there is a gray line here with these boxes. They're all connected to that. Does that gray line represent the door, Exhibit 26?
It does.
And could you please explain to the jurors how the position of the door was chosen for this graphic?
I chose the position of the door. I don't have any knowledge as to the position of the door during the shooting. It was on a hydraulic, so it would open and close if you were not holding on to it. I chose 45 degrees for demonstrative purposes, but I was also able to rule out that that door was open to 90 degrees based on the extension of the trajectory. There were no bullet holes through a wall going into the yard, a fence. So I knew that we had a little bit to work with because there was not evidence of a bullet hole passing through the gate or the wall. It also could not be completely within the frame, so completely closed based on the trajectories and the absence of anything on the other side. So the wall and the door going down to the basement, those were not hit by any bullets or frag.
Okay. But again, you're indicating that you can't give a precise angle, if you will, of what position the door was in at the time it was struck by the bullets?
That's correct. It is an arbitrary angle that I chose. I was eliminating the extremes, but I don't know if that was in a 45-degree angle or if it was changing during the progression of the shots.
Let's talk about the extension of those trajectory lines that you were describing to us. They extend both back from the door towards the yard as well as into the house, right?
That is correct.
And can you tell us about, I don't know if accuracy is the right word, but the meaningfulness of those lines on first the outside of the door?
With the outside of the door, they haven't really engaged with anything other than that door material. So we have the glass, which I wasn't able to examine, and the door. Beyond that, if they hit something, they could have been thrown off their path. But I was able to document what I saw on the scene in that door that I was able to examine.
So is it fair to say that the trajectory line coming back out from the door outside, those would be fair and accurate representations of the trajectory lines, assuming the door is at a 45-degree angle, correct?
Yes, that's an extension of my trajectory.
Going back outside, right?
Correct, but taking into account that there was glass that I wasn't able to examine.
Thank you. How about the lines going into the house? Can you tell us about those lines?
Those are an extension of the trajectories as they move into the house. So they're going northeast in relation to the house. They're not connected to anything above the sink area. So I was not able to establish a trajectory going from the door to impact 5, hole 6, and hole 7.
And would the presence of another intervening object in addition to the glass, such as a human body, affect the trajectories of bullets entering in through the door?
Yes, it could.
How significant, again, going back to your discussion of bullets striking softer materials and engaging with those substances, how does that affect trajectories?
It could cause fragmentation. It could cause the trajectory to cease. So typically when projectiles engage with targets, it can stop within that body and not move any further. It can also exit the body in more than one piece at a different angle that it went in.
And again, stepping outside, so here, is this brown line coming here, and then over here? And is that the fence of the home? The exterior fence?
I'm sorry, could you point,
Here.
could you do it again? Yes, that is the fence, external to the house.
And is this the gate for the fence?
Yes,
And this is the sidewalk that goes around the outside of the house here?
correct.
So, and I may not have asked you this, and just to clarify for the record, this whole diagram, it also not only fairly and accurately depicts your findings, but also the scene. So the layout of everything, of where everything is, correct?
It does, yes.
So then interpreting and understanding your diagram, the way that this door is positioned in these trajectory lines, again, coming from outside into the door, those go back to that open area at the gate of the fence?
Yes, as we found it when we arrived on scene.
Thank you. And did you have an opportunity to view the door when it was still installed in the house with your trajectory rods in from the area of that fence here, looking over at your trajectory rods?
Like in the yard area, is that what you're
Yes.
asking? Yes,
Over by the fence?
correct.
And were you able to see the trajectory rods from that area?
Yes, I was.
Did your case and findings undergo a technical and administrative review?
Yes, they do.
And could you please tell us a little bit about that?
With the technical review, another qualified examiner, qualified in shooting incident and reconstructions, will take a look at all of my documentation, and they make sure that they agree that my report is based on solid ground. So I have documented everything in the scene and have come to the correct conclusion. So by doing a technical review, they're making sure that what I'm stating is supported by all the data that I collected. The administrative review follows the technical review, and they're just looking for grammatical errors, that I signed and initialed everything, that everything has dates and is documented properly.
And what were the results of those reviews for your analysis of this case for the incident at 3996 Estates Place?
It passed both reviews.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Keelia. That's all I have.
Any cross-examination?
Good morning, Ms. Keolia.
Good morning.
I'm Steve Nolder. I'm one of Mr. Meade's lawyers, and we've talked on a prior occasion, haven't we?
Yes, sir.
And Caitlin Stevens was part of that conversation, right?
That's right.
And it was a few weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And thank you for talking to me then. And I do have some questions about your work here in Columbus, as well as your work at your FBI laboratory in, I think it's Quantico, Virginia, right?
Yes, sir.
And I think your testimony was on December the 17th, 13 days after the shooting in this case, you visited Columbus with the laboratory shooting reconstruction team, right?
My response was on the 17th. Yes, not my testimony.
Yeah, that's what I thought I said. Your job was to find bullet holes and impacts to establish trajectories in that visit, right?
That is correct.
Essentially, you're trying to find the pathway of bullets that might have been fired on that day, right?
That is correct.
That's your expertise, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think that your testimony was you finished at least all your field work on December 17th, 2020, right?
Yes, I did.
Only needed one day to complete that, right?
Correct.
And then you completed a report, your expert report, that went through these multiple layers of review, and that was created on, I think, February the 12th, 2021. Does that sound right?
That sounds correct.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit J. Yeah, approach her.
You may.
Ms. Julia, I'm going to hand you again, what's marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit J. And can you tell me what that is?
Yes, the first page is the request for a laboratory report. No, excuse me. This is the import form, FD 1063. It gives a synopsis of the enclosures. And then behind that is the report dated February 12th, 2021. And this was written by me.
Okay. And can you go back to the first page? You used some government speak as far as FD 2061, I think. What do you mean when you say that?
This is, I believe, the import form. I'm unfamiliar with this particular form,
Okay.
but I can read what it says the enclosures are.
Right. But it's an FBI form, right?
That is correct.
May I retrieve the exhibit, Your Honor?
You may.
And you were also interviewed about your report by FBI agents and U.S. Attorney's Office members on March the 4th of 2021, weren't you?
I don't specifically recall.
You remember being interviewed by FBI agents here in Columbus, as well as someone in the U.S. Attorney's Office about this report. I think you were in your office and they were appearing by either phone or by Zoom.
Okay. I don't specifically remember, but I record communications in my communication log.
But you don't remember the phone conversation or interview?
I don't.
And if I told you that during this recorded interview that you spoke about your general philosophies on what you do at the scene, and you said that when you write your report, you only base it on what you observe at the scene. Is that consistent with your philosophy?
Yes, it is.
And again, your report's based on what the evidence tells you, I think was the phrase you used. That's something that's familiar to you, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And in addition to the expert report that's labeled as Defendant's Exhibit J, there was also an addendum to that report created, wasn't there?
Yes.
And I believe that addendum was created on September the 25th of 2023, right?
That sounds correct.
And may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Ms. peculiar. I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit K. Can you tell me what that is?
This says addendum to the FBI laboratory report.
Does it bear your signature?
It does.
And isn't it true that you didn't create that document?
I did not, but I signed it because it does represent my conclusions.
You agreed with the contents of it, right?
That's correct.
All right. But in fact, Mr. Merkel created that document for your signature, didn't he?
Objection.
Basis?
Relevance. She already.
Overruled.
I'm not sure who created it, but he did send it to me as an email attachment.
Was it blank when he sent it to you for your signature?
Was the signature blank?
Yep.
It was.
Okay. So he sent it to you, and you reviewed it, and then you signed off on it, correct?
That is correct.
And was he with you on December the 17th, 2020, when you were at the scene?
No, sir.
And was he with you on February the 12th, 2021, when you created your expert report?
No.
So again, we're back to trajectories, and your function when you were in Columbus on December the 17th was to determine the pathways of bullets based on holes and impacts that you saw at the scene, right?
That is correct.
And essentially, the point in determining a trajectory would be that you're trying to determine how a bullet moves in space, right?
Yes, yes.
And you have an ending point of a trajectory and a beginning point of a trajectory, right?
We have an extension through the rod. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
And you determined that the ending and beginning points were arbitrary, I think was the phrase you used. Isn't that true?
They're not arbitrary. They are established through what I find on the scene. So we're physically fitting those trajectory rods and cones to the bullet holes that we see and arranging them to reflect what the remaining material is telling me about the directionality of that trajectory.
Well, you determined, though, that the trajectories, let's talk about the ending point. They ended somewhere in the kitchen, right?
Yes, they did.
And if they didn't extend into the kitchen, I think that you told the folks that interviewed you on March the 4th of 2021 that they would have ended somewhere in Mr. Goodson's body, right?
They are consistent with that. They don't extend beyond where I would expect them to extend. So they engaged with some other type of material that was no longer in the scene when I was there.
And isn't it true that you didn't know the position of where Mr. Meade was located when the shots were fired?
That's correct.
And so the trajectories that you established, I think you said generally established where Mr. Meade's position was, and the trajectories flowed along that same plane. Is that right?
They do, yes.
Along the same flight path, I think.
Correct.
Now, I believe that one of the ways in this conversation that you had with the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office, you said that one of the ways that could establish the position of Mr. Meade was to look at the shell casings and try to determine his position once the ejection pattern of the gun was determined. Do you remember that conversation?
That is an examination that we do. We do an analysis of where the cartridge cases are landing in relation to where the firearm is. But that's not an exam that we did at the laboratory.
Right. And I don't think from your interview that's one of your favorite things to do, because you said that shell casings are transient evidence, is how you label them to be, meaning that they can be kicked around and move very easily, right?
That's correct. They come with, that exam comes with different limitations. So you're correct that they can roll around, they can change position, especially if you have a shooting in like a parking lot or a parking structure that has smooth floors, they can roll. Something with grass, typically you don't see a lot of movement. Also, intervening objects are a problem. So even if that cartridge case would eject 6 feet to the right and 4 feet back, If you have an innervating object like a fence or a car, it will bounce off of it and might even go the opposite direction. So it has certain limitations. And typically, most firearms are designed to go to the right with their ejection ports.
So the ejection port of the gun would send the cartridge to the right,
Typically, that's what we see.
unless you're dealing with a revolver where the cartridge wouldn't eject, right?
Correct.
And I believe that when you were on the scene on December the 17th of 2020, that your host that day pointed out to you where shell casings in this case were found, right?
Yes, the evidence markers were still on the scene when I arrived, but not the evidence itself.
I'm going to hand you, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm going to hand you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit 2HH. Ms. Culia, can you take a look at that and tell me if that reflects what you saw on December the 17th of 2020?
Yes, it does.
And, okay, publisher,
You may.
so when you're on scene on December the 17th of 2020, you see that there are 6 shell casings grouped here by this stockade fence, right?
Correct. Or 6 evidence markers, to clarify.
That's right, they'd already been picked up, but the evidence markers are there. And you said that the weapons typically eject to the right, correct?
Correct, yes.
And so from that, it would be fair to assume that Mr. Meade was somewhere to the left of that when the shots were fired, correct?
If they stayed in position after being fired, but again, we have that transient evidence limitation to those exams.
And these are all tightly grouped together, right, the evidence markers?
Yes,
Okay. So, I think you said that the firearms and tool marks unit that you're a member of is skilled at determining the ejection pattern of a weapon, correct?
we are, but again, we did not examine the firearm in this case.
No, you didn't. And you were asked if you were able to determine the ejection pattern of the weapon during this interview by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI in Columbus, weren't you?
Yes,
And you said that not only was your unit skilled at doing that, but you too were skilled at doing that, right?
yes, although if it had been submitted to the FBI laboratory, I would not be doing those exams because it's evidence-based. If you respond to a crime scene, you don't also handle the physical evidence. We do this to prevent bias, so both sides of the house aren't really talking to each other. Another examiner would have done that testing.
But within the FBI.
Yes, sir.
Right. And you told the people that interviewed you the process by which the ejection pattern of the weapon would be determined, and that is that someone would go to the FBI range in a grassy area and fire this weapon 10 to 20 times, and they would need not only Mr. Meade's weapon, but they would need light-tight ammunition, right?
That is correct.
And light-tight ammunition means that that would be the type of ammunition that was fired on December the 4th, 2020, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if it's .223 ammunition that's fired on December the 4th of 2020, you would need .223 ammunition to roughly approximate the ejection pattern of the weapon, right?
That is correct.
And so you were asked if either the firearms and tool mark unit could do this, maybe not you specifically, and you affirmatively said that that could be done, right?
Yes, that's an exam that we do.
And I think that you, by your testimony here today, are in agreement that the FBI in Columbus never sent that weapon to the FBI in Quantico, Virginia to do that analysis. Isn't that true?
It was not sent to the FBI.
And isn't it true that not only did the FBI not send it to you, but Mr. Merkel and the prosecution team here never sent it to you, correct?
That firearm was never received at the FBI laboratory.
Now let's talk a little bit about the direction of the trajectories. You used a compass to determine this, right?
The general directionality, yes, I did.
So you're not talking right to left or left to right, you're talking, I believe it's southwest to northeast, right?
Yes.
And now, would you agree that the trajectories in their direction, they don't tell you the position of Mr. Goodson's body at impact?
I'm sorry. Who is,
He's the decedent, the person who was shot.
oh, I'm sorry.
So,
Yes, I don't have any opinion on the decedent's body or body placement during the shooting.
so you don't know if he was standing straight, you don't know if he's hunched over, you don't know if he was twisted, you don't know if his body was in motion when he was shot.
That is
Based on the trajectories that you did, right?
exactly, that is correct.
So either before or after or during the shooting, you have no information to add as to Mr. Goodson, the decedent's body position, right?
That is correct.
And isn't it true that exit wounds also won't tell you the trajectories that you sought out to determine?
Objection.
Basis.
Foundation, she's not a coroner.
But did you speak to that issue?
Overruled, that you, if she
Can
can
you
answer.
answer the question?
I don't analyze any trajectory going through a human body.
And that's because that body's not on the scene, right? And you didn't experience that body to determine the trajectory. Isn't that true?
Well, and it's also outside of my scope, so I can't testify to anything having to do with a bullet's interaction through a human.
All right. So we know that the trajectories are, as you said, southwest to northeast. And it isn't also true that you determined that the trajectory was in an upward angle.
Yes, it was.
May I approach, Your Honor?
May?
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes, Ms. Culia, as Defendant's Exhibit M. All right.
Okay.
You were at that scene, you saw this side door depicted in Defendant's Exhibit M, right?
Yes, I did.
Right. And isn't it true that we have an awning that's over the side door?
Yes,
And there's a frame of some sort that's holding up the awning, right?
that's correct.
And you carefully looked at that frame when you were on scene on December the 17th of 2020 to determine if it was struck by gunfire, right?
Yes, I did.
And you concluded that based on your careful analysis that it wasn't struck by gunfire, right?
That's correct.
And so we have a sidewalk leading up to the side door, right?
Yes, sir.
It goes through the stockade fence, right?
Yes,
And then there's a step up onto this concrete pad, right?
that's right.
And roughly 18 inches to step up onto the concrete pad? Or thereabouts?
I don't know.
All right. But it's a step up.
It is a step, yes.
And then there's also a step up onto the threshold to get in the back door, isn't
There
Or
is,
side door.
yes.
And so that's consistent with what you saw on December the 17th of 2020, right? This view.
Yes, it is.
Now, as far as the upward trajectory, if we can go back to Defendant's Exhibit M, the upward trajectory would simply tell us that Mr. Meade's position when he fired the gun was lower than the position of the screen door when there was impact, right?
I'm only going to speak to the position of the end of the firearm, and that means that it was angled up.
And so do you know, you don't know the position of the weapon, whether it's low or high when Mr. Meade shot, right?
It would have been lower along that trajectory path.
That flight path.
That is correct.
But again, the bullets are traveling on an upward trajectory, and they're going from southeast or southwest to northeast, right?
That is correct.
Now, when Mr. Shaw talked to you on direct examination, you spoke about intervening objects, right?
Yes,
And this mesh screen to the screen door was the intervening object, right?
it was one of them, yes.
Me?
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit L. Ask you if you can take a look at that and identify it. Does it look familiar?
Yes, it does. This is the outside of the screen.
Again, that was roughly how that door looked when you encountered it on December the 17th of 2020, right?
Yes,
It's in a closed position right now, right?
that's correct.
And that's a position that you eliminated a possibility that door could be in at the time of the shooting, right?
Correct.
It couldn't be in that position.
That is correct.
And again, we have hole 1, hole 2, or hole 2, hole 3, hole 4, right?
Yes,
Then up here, we have impact 1, I-1. right?
yes, yes.
And you were the one that labeled the hole 2, 3, 4, impact 1, right?
I was.
You were the one that chose that convention, right?
Yes,
And the reason you do that is so that we can make sense out of the various holes or impacts when maybe you're in court, right?
yes.
Yeah, approach it on.
Me?
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit N, as in Nancy. Can you take a look at that?
Yes,
And you recognize it?
I do.
And was that your labeling of the mesh on the screen door
Yes,
and the convention you chose?
correct.
I-1, H2, H3, and H4.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And your choice of labeling, I-1, H2, H3, H4, that doesn't relate to the order of the shots, right?
No, it does not.
Because you don't know the order of the shots, right?
I do not know.
Your analysis it wasn't possible to determine that with what was available for you, right?
Exactly. In this case, I cannot determine the order of shots that were taken.
Mr. Nolder, was that M or N? M as in Mary or
N as in Nancy?
Okay.
And I think that when you talked with Mr. Shaw on direct examination, you said that you were able to determine the trajectories through the placement of rods and cones as he showed you, and that once the bullet would have either passed through, or bullets passed through H2, H3, H4, or hit at the top of the mesh, I-1, that their path could have changed slightly, right?
Yes, it could.
That's something that we just don't know, but based on your expertise and experience, it wouldn't surprise you if hitting this intervening object would cause the bullet to slightly change its pathway.
That is possible.
And that would have occurred before the bullet entered the decedent, Mr. Goodson's body, right?
If he was inside past that door, yes.
And you determined, though, didn't you, that H2, H3, H4, based on their position on that screen, those would have been rounds that would have entered Mr. Goodson's body, right?
They are consistent with that, as they don't continue beyond that point, and I would expect if they didn't hit an intervening object to continue on.
So those would have been trajectories that ended in his body, because you know that there was nothing further to find, right?
Ended or changed. Changed is also a possibility if they pass through that intervening object.
Okay. All right, so we saw the, may I approach on?
Me?
I'm going to hand you what's been previously marked for identification purposes as, I think it's 10P as in Paul. My handwriting's worse than mine.
Okay. Yes.
You previously identified that, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's your handiwork there in holes 2, 3, and 4, right?
It is.
And that's after you inserted the rods and cones, correct?
Yes, it is.
And so, just so we're clear, a hole 2 became trajectory 1, right?
Yes.
And hole 3 became trajectory 2,
Yes.
and hole 4 became trajectory 3.
Yes.
And again, that doesn't inform us as far as the order of the shots, right?
No, it does not.
That's the sequence or convention that you used.
Correct.
Now, those are obviously three different trajectories, and we can't tell definitively if there are three different trajectories based on the door maybe moving or closing, or the shooter moving, right?
Could you repeat the first part of that question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. We have three different trajectories, right? And so we can't determine why there are three different trajectories, except that maybe the door was moving during the shooting, or maybe the shooter was moving, correct?
Do you mean why they're in slightly different positions?
Yes.
Yes, lots of different movable objects. So the shooter, the door, and it's changing position while it's moving, obviously.
All right. Now let's talk about limitations. You spoke about that with Mr. Shaw on direct examination. And during this interview on March the 4th of 2021, I think you used the term voids. Is that a term that you would use when you're talking about limitations of your report?
A void meaning missing area?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's your scientific way of saying there are certain items or information that's missing that maybe you wished you had, right?
Correct.
And one of the voids that you spoke about in this March 4th, 2021 interview was that the FBI didn't process the scene, correct?
Originally, they did not.
Matter of fact, the shooting occurred December the 4th, 2020, and you weren't on scene until 13 days later, December the 17th, 2020, right?
That is correct.
And almost 2 weeks after the scene was the scene under the watchful eye of local law enforcement this entire time?
I don't know.
But again, that was a void or limitation that you verbalized when you were interviewed on March the 4th, 2020.
It could have been, that is definitely a limitation. If you can't control the movement of objects within a scene, they're taken out of play.
And you also articulated that another void or limitation was this large hole in the wall above the sink in the kitchen, right?
Yes.
And just so we're clear, our approach, Your Honor?
Me?
I'm going to hand you what's been previously marked for identification purposes as Defendant's Exhibit C. And Ms. Quelia, can you say if that is the hole that you're speaking about?
Yes, that's the hole.
And that is how that part of the kitchen looked when you were on scene December the 17th of 2020, right?
Yes, sir.
So we had one picture of an apple hanging here. We had a hole, and not in this picture, but there was another picture of a single apple hanging to the right of that, right?
That is correct.
And, may I approach, Your Honor?
Me?
May I approach?
You may?
Again, I'm going to present Defendant Exhibit C. I've already identified that, but I'm going to hand you also Defendant Exhibit B.
Okay.
And isn't it true that this picture here in the middle,
What are you referring to, B or C?
B, that has three red apples and the yellow apple, that picture was not hanging, covering that hole in the wall when you were there on December the 17th, 2020, right?
That's correct.
And instead, that just gaping hole was there. And isn't it true that some other agency before the FBI became involved in this investigation had cut out that section of the wall?
Objection.
Overruled. Some other agency.
Yes, it was missing, and that's what I can testify to, that that section was missing.
And isn't it true that you wanted to get this picture of the apples, the one in the middle here with the 3 red apples and the 1 yellow apple, to hang over that hole, right?
That is correct. If
That was your desire on December the 17th, 2020. You wanted that picture to see if it was in play in any of the trajectories, right?
correct, there's a picture hanger beyond that, so behind the picture. So if you can put something back in play in its approximate position, you can incorporate that into the scene. You just have to clearly state it in your notes and in your report that it was moved out of place and you put it back. But I did not do that in this case.
And you didn't do that because the picture was thrown away, right?
The picture was not present, so I don't actually know what happened to it, but I did request it and I was told it was not available.
It was discarded, right?
Again, I don't know exactly what happened to it, but when I requested it, they said they could not get it back.
One of the other limitations that I believe you talked about already on direct examination was that either the plexiglass or the glass for the door just wasn't present, and that prohibited you from determining the order of the shots, right?
Order of shots is typically with a laminate glass that fractures. With something like safety glass, we can determine directionality. It's really hard to determine in safety glass, the kind that's designed to crumble, or popcorn glass. It's hard to determine the number of shots sometimes because you're missing large voids or the timing of shots.
And the final limitation or void in your work was this whole issue of the storm door. This door here, you tried mightily to determine the position of this door at the time of shooting, but you couldn't do that, right?
Correct. The image associated with my graphics of that door at a 45-degree angle, that was chosen by me, eliminating the extremes.
So storm door is a movable object, and again, it was unknown, the position of it was unknown at the time of the shooting. And because the position of the door was unknown, isn't it true that you could only place the trajectories generally flowing into the room along the other holes and impacts that you recovered?
Yes,
And you know Jennifer Thronberg?
yes,
And Jennifer Thronberg, isn't it true that she's also a colleague of yours at the FBI?
she recently retired, but she was, yes,
Oh, well, at the time she was, right?
she was.
And she, I think you previously testified that this LSRT group that you're a member of, that they also had an OPU member, Operations Project Unit, is that right?
Operational Projects Unit, yes.
They had an Operational Projects Unit member along to 3996 Estates Place, right?
That is correct.
And so Ms. Thronberg, she assisted you in creating States Exhibit 10, right?
The overhead graphic?
Yes.
Yes,
And isn't it true that you and Ms. Thronberg exchanged emails about trying to establish the position of the door?
yes, we,
Basis?
Relevance and hearsay.
Overruled.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defense Exhibit P. May I approach you?
You may.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defense Defense Exhibit P, Ms. Quelia, and ask you to review that document. And I have some questions for you when you're finished, and just tell me when you're finished.
Okay.
And this document appears to be an email thread between you and Ms. Thronberg, correct?
Yes.
And if we can talk about the top two emails, it appears that on January the 26th of 2021 at 4:02 PM, that Ms. Thronberg sends you an email, right?
Yes.
And that would be,
Your Honor,
You want to approach?
We take the exhibit down.
I overruled.
you're letting him post it, you know?
Yeah.
so this email is sent before your report is finalized on February the 12th, right?
Yes.
And Ms. Thronberg, again, she's assisting you in preparing and completing what becomes State's Exhibit 10, the overhead graphic, right?
Yes.
And isn't it true that in this email, essentially, if we cut to the chase, she says, how do you want the door shown? Since I don't believe you all know exactly how it was positioned, I can open it so the trajectories are in the general direction of the holes, and then caveat it with exact position of the door is in undetermined, right? She writes
Correct.
it.
Right.
And so the following day, you respond to that, right?
Yes.
And on January 27, 2021, you write, I think the door is semi-open with trajectories going through the door, pointing in the same general direction as the holes on the kitchen wall would be best. Plus caveat about not knowing the exact position of the door. So that's the email thread between you and Ms. Thronberg, right?
Yes.
So you settled on a 45-degree angle, right?
I did.
And
Yes.
that was your term that when you were interviewed on March the 4th, that you said that you settled in the position of the door, right?
Right.
You could eliminate closed, you could eliminate 90 degrees open, right?
That is correct.
90 degrees open.
Correct. Yeah.
A couple of other things, Ms. Quillia. In addition to determining the bullet holes and impacts, you also did some, I think it's called bullet hole testing?
Yes, I did.
In bullet hole testing, and you did that on scene at 3996 Estates Place when you were there on December 17, 2020?
Yes, I did.
Bullet hole testing would be a chemical process that you use to test an impact or a hole, right?
Yes, the correct term is the BTK test or the bullet hole testing kit.
Okay.
So it's a BTK kit.
And so you use this bullet hole testing kit, you put the chemical agent on what you suspect may be an impact or a hole, and you're looking for a reaction, right? A chemical reaction.
It's a color change reaction. Yes, it's a chemical. Just to clarify, we treat pieces of paper. So I'll take a known copper specimen, a known lead specimen. I will conduct tests on just the materials that I'm going to use for those bullet hole tests to make sure that they're reacting positively. I'll also do negative controls. So I'll test an area that does not have a bullet hole but is involved or made out of the same material. So for example, if I'm in a home, I'm going to test the painted wall if there's a bullet hole going through it, but not the bullet hole itself. I just want to make sure that it's not lead-based paint, so I'm not getting a false positive. And then I'll take those bullet hole testing kit papers, treat it with a solution, touch the hole, bring it back, put a chemical reactive solution on that, and look for a color change. So it's a presumptive test. It's not an absolute, this is lead, but I can say it's consistent with lead.
And the reason you're looking for lead or copper is that that's a common element that you would find in a bullet, right?
Yes, sir.
May I approach your honor?
You may.
Ms. Quiglia, I'm going to hand you what's been previously identified. I think you identified it as State's Exhibit 10D. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
And that would be of the picture of the apple that was right of the hole that you encountered when you were on scene on December the 17th, 2020, right?
The large void.
Right,
Yes, it's to the right of that.
right. And so on this particular document, you have listed H6, H7, I5, right?
Yes,
So that would be hole 6, hole 7, impact 5, right?
yes,
And you tested those areas and determined, you used this bullet hole testing kit, and you determined the presence of lead or copper on those locations, right?
with the I5 and H7, I believe I did that test. I don't recall doing it on H6 unless it's in my report or my notes.
Okay.
And yes, I do that basically to confirm that it is related to firearms evidence. So we all have damage in various parts of our home. So sometimes some of that damage can be misconstrued as evidence related to a shooting when in fact it's not. So we did those presumptive tests.
Right. And that was your purpose in doing those tests, right?
Yes,
Right. And so, just so we're clear, H6, I5, H7, I think from direct examination, you couldn't tie those to any of the other damage done to the screen. So H2, H3, H4, I5, or I1 rather, you couldn't say that this damage to this hole or that picture was a result of the damage done to the screen, right? It's a different trajectory.
maybe not different, but it's, if it passed through an intervening object, it could be from the same projectile fragmented, or it could be totally different. It could be a different shot.
I believe I'm finished, Your Honor. May I have a moment?
You may.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, briefly, Your Honor.
Is everyone doing all right?
Thank you, Ms. Quiglia. We're almost done. So I just want to follow up with a few questions for clarification. You were speaking with Mr. Nolder some moments ago about different factors that could affect trajectories and their locations. I think it was when he had your attention focused on the, excuse me, holes in the door. and asking why they might be in different positions. And I believe you had mentioned that the shooter, rather the gun moving, is a factor that can cause, obviously, the holes to be in different positions. Can you talk to us about how the movement of the origin of the gun moving, how movements at that location translate into where the locations of holes might be as distance increases?
Sure. When you're shouldering or firing a firearm, any small change that your body is making will translate into a larger change out in the field. It kind of opens up like a cone. So any direction gets more pronounced as you get further away from the shooter.
So if the gun is moving as bullets are being expelled either in semi-automatic or automatic mode, if that weapon is moving, even just slightly, that can actually change significantly, potentially, the impacts as the distance where, if there's a greater distance between that gun moving, or the gun and the impact point.
Yes, it can.
Okay. And going back to the discussion about the marks on the wall, going back to the kitchen there, the holes, hole 6, 7, impact 5, you had indicated that could or could not be potentially related to the trajectories that you had established in the screen door, correct?
That is correct.
And is there any correlation, and let me, may I publish back State's Exhibit 10?
Yeah.
Thank you. Did the marks of impact 5, hole 6, or hole 7 have any bearing on the trajectories on the entrance side back here behind the door? Is there any relationship between what was found here and the trajectories you established of the bullets going into the door?
They had the same directionality, so they all came from the southwest and moved towards the northeast.
Okay. But other than that, you can't establish whether impact 5, hole 6, hole 7 line up with holes 2, 3, or 4.
They did not line up with them.
Okay. And also, because there was no glass at the door at the scene, you can't tell whether how many additional bullets may have passed through that area, correct?
Correct.
So, and finally, you mentioned safety glass, and just to clarify, why were you saying safety glass? Is that the glass that was on the screen door?
That's the glass on the storm door.
The storm door.
Yes, and it's just designed for safety purposes, so you don't get cut. It's also common in vehicles. You'll see it just kind of crumble and fall out. That's typically where we see it, for safety reasons.
And when that glass is struck by a bullet, how does it typically react with a bullet strike?
It cracks and crumbles.
Crumbles completely, just a little bit?
It just depends.
Okay. But how does it crumble? Into big pieces, little pieces?
Small pieces,
Like popcorn, as you described?
yes,
Okay.
or smaller.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, you can sit down. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our lunch break. Do not discuss this case among yourselves. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express an opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. And if we can be ready right around.